And last month, at the end of last month, the Democratic National Committee met, and it reformed significantly the way it chooses presidential nominees. And here to talk about that with us now is our good friend Larry Cohen. For those of you who haven't seen Larry on his previous opinions on this show or elsewhere for that matter, Larry is the board chair of Our Revolution. That's the group that kind of sprung up after the Bernie Sanders campaign. I met Larry while I was working on the Sanders campaign. He is also the vice chair of the DNC's Unity Reform Committee, whose recommendations form the basis for these reforms. And he is a former president of the Communication Workers of America and longtime labor activist as well. So here to talk about those reforms now, I welcome my friend Larry Cohen. Welcome,
Larry.
My pleasure.
Good to see you again.
Yeah, always great to see you. And so let's talk about this. I didn't get to go to Chicago, which I really wanted to. But what happened? First of all, what was the Unity Reform Commission, the commission you were part of?
So the Unity Reform Commission came out of the 2016 Philadelphia Democratic National Convention, designed to look at reforms in the party itself so that it would be more of a popular party, dealing with at least the perceptions, from my point of view, more than that too many things were predetermined and controlled by an elite versus the voters and the members of the party. So that started right at the convention. It was adopted unanimously, a resolution creating it that laid out a bunch of directions for it. There were 21 people on it. The chair came from the Clinton side. They had 10 people. Bernie named me vice chair. We had 8, and 3 came from the party chair, eventually Tom Perez. And the 21 of us then met for a year and a half, came up with basically 30 pages of changes, proposed changes. Those changes went through the Rules Committee of the party and then voted on Saturday, August 25th, almost 2 weeks ago in Chicago. And most of them adopted. Everything that was voted on was adopted. Some of them were not put up for votes yet.
Okay, yeah, being an operative word. So what I take away from that, first of all, is I know a lot of people who are still upset. Even my taxi driver coming over here, we got to talking and same thing, they didn't do right by Bernie. You hear that a lot. Or you hear that the process wasn't democratic enough. So my understanding is that the Unity Reform Commission was supposed to address that. Also, in a way, indirectly by changing the rules, hopefully to address this sort of bitter divide that a lot of people felt, lingering bitterness, I think, on both sides between the Hillary Clinton forces and the Bernie forces, right? So this group was put together to address that. You were vice chair at Bernie's request. So on the most global scale, before we get to the nature of the reforms themselves, how do you think that reconciliation or healing process is going through this, as far as this process is concerned?
Yeah, well, as I said, during the year and a half when the 21 of us met, looking more through the windshield versus this much smaller rearview mirror, as if it was a car. The flashcard we had is, voting rights inside, not just outside. So Democrats have long criticized Republicans for voter suppression, but never criticized Democratic party practices in many states that also were designed to hold down turnout and party registration, as well as the whole superdelegate ordeal that became a big focus of our work. But so I think that it was much more about going forward, can we build a popular party versus, obviously you can't fix the past anyway. But, I would say the chair, Jen Dillon, and I, she was great. So forgetting me, she was great to work with. And I would give her a lot of the credit for how we sort of blazed this path forward without a kind of defensiveness about, that could have been there about, what went down 2 years ago.
Oh, good to hear, because, I asked that question for a couple of reasons. And one is because I want to know the answer. Yeah. The other is because I worry going forward that this sort of lingering divisiveness will cause people to not get involved the way I'd like to see them get involved. And it doesn't matter to me. I come from a very left-leaning place, and I come from a very activist place. I'm really, that drives me more than anything else. But I worry that at the thought that lingering resentment over the past or lingering suspicion over the structure of how the Democratic Party does its work, which is by no means perfect yet, I think you'd agree, that might keep people away from getting engaged in this project.
I mean, I think it does keep people away. For example, in New York State, 3.6 million unaffiliated voters can vote in next Thursday. Another issue, why would it be on a Thursday? Next Thursday's primary, those unaffiliated voters, again, 3.6 million, last October 13th or earlier had to switch from unaffiliated to the Democratic Party. So they actually are kept from participating. It's not just a perception. That's one of the things that, was a definite outcome, that the party in New York must change that. And then, you get into when will they change it? Obviously not for this election. So I think it's not, my point of view, not just a perception. Is the party open to what I call party building in the more than 3,000 counties in America? Because basically, party has a county-based structure, and then state. There's 57 state parties because of the territories, and then the DNC, which gets way too much attention because the real action is in these 57 parties. The DNC, except for the nominating of the president, which is a big deal, but not the main deal, has no leverage over what these 57 parties do. They're legally separate structures.
So, and that's a great point, because so the DNC, and I was going to bring that up, so the DNC decisions that were made, let's talk about what they were, and then let's talk about the relationship with those independent parties going forward. So the one that got all the attention, and understandably so, was this change in the superdelegate rules. Now, some of us, you guys met as a committee to draft these, so I assume there was a certain process of compromise involved here and there. Some of us would have said, like, the ideal solution would be get rid of superdelegates altogether. What are they doing in there? And you're a superdelegate, I guess, right? But you might agree with that statement. I don't know.
No, I can't. I was Bernie's first superdelegate endorser in July of 2015. Or June of 2015, and I said at the time, I'm campaigning to end superdelegates. So, and then I ended up with this job. So
right. So here you are. You're a superdelegate. You're
14
part
years.
of this. You want ideally you would like to see the superdelegate role go away, but this is a compromise, and it says, as I understand it, that superdelegates won't vote on the first go round. Is that
unless
correct?
It's a vote by acclamation, essentially. In other words, we have no impact on the nomination of the president through the first ballot. There hasn't been a second ballot, as you likely know, since, I was just born. You were probably not just born yet, 1952.
I wasn't around yet.
Yeah, close though. I know how old you are. So.
Okay.
Just kidding. So anyway, that's the last time, that's how Adlai Stevenson got nominated.
Right.
There's multiple ballots. And actually, having been through this process, I would say, that's okay, because on a second ballot, the way the party works is all delegates are unpledged. So it wouldn't matter if you got elected as a Sanders delegate. If it ever went to a second ballot, you're unpledged, because otherwise you'd never get a result.
Right, of course, yeah.
So I would say that, the majority of these so-called, they're now called automatic delegates. The name's been changed. There's nothing super about us because we don't have these privileges that we had about the presidential nomination. Anyway, the automatic delegates, are delegates to the convention. They just stand down on the first ballot.
Okay, so, and again, we're talking with Larry Cohen, who is the board chair of Our Revolution and the vice chair of the Unity Reform Commission at the DNC. So that really addresses the biggest concern I had in 2016, right? Which was Hillary Clinton had the support of virtually, I think, everybody but you for a while there.
Yeah, well,
and a few others.
650 at the end.
Right.
Out of 715.
Right. So what used to drive me crazy is that even the progressive publications, before a single vote was cast,
Correct.
you would see these delegate counts that showed Hillary crushing Bernie. So people would say, he doesn't have a chance, which I thought just the media reporting alone perverted the process. So that to me...
That's critical, by the way.
Yeah, that's why I bring it up.
Just some quick arithmetic, very fast. 4,800 delegates to the convention. 715 were what were called super delegates, now automatic delegates. So it's not a lot of math to figure out that if you need 2,400 and you start out with 600, imagine if that was some sports game, people would say rigged.
Right. So from my point of view, I guess my question to you is, did this process fix the most egregious problem with presidential nominations?
Well, so it fixed the easiest one to see and to control. So this one, the DNC can easily control because
fair enough.
They run the convention and we won't vote. But then, there were 3 other areas. So we called that bucket 1. 4 buckets, we split the 21 people up. Primaries, how are they run? I already alluded to New York. Caucuses mandated huge changes, and those parties control the caucuses. Whereas on the primaries, some of them will say, not really fairly, but they'll say, well, it's state law, and we can't fix the problems that we have. Again, some fairly, some not fairly on that. And then the 4th area is the parties themselves. How do they behave, and what does a popular party look like? How does the 57 parties elect, their own leadership, and how can people participate in that? It's quite obscure. It's the quick answer. And so those were the 4 areas. So this one gets the most attention, somewhat, I would say, rightfully so, because it's controlled by the DNC. Period. Right. It's over. So even the Iowa caucus and these changes mandated in caucuses, that's got to go through the Iowa Democratic Party, who was great, by the way, who then mandates these changes for the Iowa caucus, which will again be the first event in 2020, around February 1st of 2020, and then to the other caucuses, and then these primary states like New York, and the party in D.C., the DNC, does not control those things. What they do control is the seating of their delegates at the 2020 convention. So at least theoretically, if they don't do what is prescribed here, their delegates won't get seated. And that did happen in 2008 when the Michigan party, Florida party jumped their primary dates. And it was key in Obama winning, actually, the nomination. Their delegates could not vote they could not vote, period, for the presidential nomination. And so that knocked out Florida in particular, where Clinton did really well. I'm not sure how Michigan would have gone, but we're not looking backward now. So they have done things like that, penalized delegates, state delegations, or given bonuses to state delegations when they sort of fit into this protracted time slots that the DNC wants. They don't want them all at the front end.
So this to me gets to a really important point that I don't think a lot of people are clear about, which is that the Democratic Party, it does consist of these many multiple organizations, states plus other incorporated entities or whatever you want to call it. So it adds up to, 57 you said? Yeah. And to me, you mentioned New York. New York to me seems like an egregious example of a party that almost would rather drive away members than open itself up to the potential for change. I mean, that's the way it looks to me from outside.
Yeah.
The requirements are so onerous and extreme, and it's nice if you've got a job as a party leader and you don't want strangers coming in expressing their opinion, but if you see the party as a tool for mobilizing and activating people, if you see a charismatic gubernatorial or senatorial or presidential candidate as somebody who can bring people into your party and then become part of that party's rank and file and future leadership, it's destructive to me. It's almost...
Well, it's not a close call. I mean, why are there 3.8 million unaffiliated voters? Largely because they don't like what the party stands for, or they never bothered to register with a party, because often at this point, in many states, people just don't bother. But it's a barrier, for sure, and it's not just that. I mean, the role of the county chair in New York or other states, including New Jersey, they're like warlords. So in New York, when they have a special election, the county chair decides who the nominee will be, say for the state legislature, for a Senate or Assembly district. Those matter just as much, by the way. This is the way, the second largest or third largest state is governed. And literally, the county chair just says, RJ, we'd like you to be our nominee. And in most of those districts, the Democrats going to win. And so it's not like the general election is what counts. No, who the nominee is counts. And that corruption goes very, very deep. There are 8 Senate Democrats in New York. This is up for grabs next Thursday, the 13th, who caucus. They get elected as Democrats and have voted and caucused with the Republicans. There are 8 of them.
I know about
called the
those
Independent Democratic Caucus. That's a disgrace. And, you know, all the people who have questioned, like, why doesn't Bernie register as a Democrat? They don't have party registration in Vermont, by the way. But, you know, some states are very different, as we talked about a few minutes ago. But they don't seem to ever say, why does Governor Cuomo and the Democratic Party leadership in New York protect these 8 from the IDC, who once again, now as they're running for election, have said, oh, we just dropped out of the Republican caucus. We're back in the Democratic caucus. They all have challengers. Our Revolution, as you said, a group where I chair the board, we have supported challengers to those 8. We're confident a number of them are going to win. But again, they're trying to run and win with a stacked deck. And despite that, that is possible.
So last question for you, because I get this a lot when people find out that I work for Bernie, or, you know, just in the nature of my work doing this job. A lot of people say, well, the Democratic Party is just useless. You know, stop trying to make change to the Democratic Party, form a third party. And I know you guys at Our Revolution work with independents, work with third parties. I was an independent until I moved to Maryland recently, and you know, want to help our comrade Ben Jealous and a few other folks. So I joined Our Revolution Maryland. So I guess my question for you is, what do you think about that argument that taking over the Democratic Party from within, which is what I see people like us doing, versus just walking away from it?
Yeah, so I think it's a question of overall political strategy. And so what we've spent the last 15 minutes on, trying to begin to clean up the rules inside the party so that people can enter and make a difference, is part one. But the overall strategy of political change in America is tortured. Nowhere else has rules like this, including these rules in the Democratic Party. When you add up all the rules and you're somebody pushing for, take an issue like Medicare for all, it's all stacked against us.
Right.
And a lot of that starts with the Constitution itself, although people don't like to hear that. You know, but it goes all the way through. And so the problem is, when you look at things like the election of a president and how the Electoral College functions, if you ignore the Democratic Party, you know, you're basically marginalizing a chance for progressives to win the presidency, or even a moderate to beat conservative, as we saw in 2000 and as we almost saw in 2016 in terms of the electoral votes.
Right.
So, yeah, part of what we have to do is get rid of the Electoral College, have a popular vote for president, clean up the Democratic Party, fix the Senate rules, have the Senate be more like a House of Lords, allow the Congress to be the Congress of the people. The number of things to change here, just to get back to, you know, how do we fight for workers' rights, where I spent 40 years, or a decent health care plan. It's the hurdles are unending. But if we don't pay attention to the rules, we're out of our minds. If we only pay attention to candidates, we have what I call candidate addiction. It's heroin. No matter how great the candidate is, if we're not doing party building in some meaningful way, and I'm not about to say my way is the only way, but if we're not building sustainable political organizations that hold those candidates accountable, instead of the donors and the consultants and the candidate themselves being on a journey for personal success, which I don't blame them for, but it's up to us. If we don't do party building, shame on us. If we don't fight to change the rules, shame on us.
And as I like to say, the Democratic Party is one tool in the process of change that we can avail ourselves of, as long as we're in it the way Thoreau was in the world. In it, but not of it.
Okay.
In it. All right. So Larry Cohen, board chair of Our Revolution, thanks as always for your fantastic work, and thanks again for coming on the program.
Okay, my pleasure.